We are so happy to see so many smiling faces. My name is Malcolm White, and my co-host is Carol Palmer. To my right, your left over here. Carol and I host a statewide public radio show called Deep South Dining, and we're delighted to have some of our Deep South family here today, MPB family. Thank you all for being here. We come each year, well, we have for the last couple of years, and record interviews with chefs in order to produce shows around those interviews, because with 50 plus chefs coming to Sipp and Savor, it's a bonanza for us. If anybody would like to be seated, there are still some chairs up front, and I see they're adding some back here. You don't have to sit, but I'm just saying if you'd like to. So welcome to this session with Chef Alon Shaya from New Orleans. We are happy you're here, and again, we are delighted, Carol and I are delighted to be a part of this. The run of show is going to be, we're going to introduce Chef Shaya, then he is going to speak for about 10 or 15 minutes, and then at the end, we will open it up to questions. So if you have a question for Chef, just hang on toward the end, and not only will you be allowed to ask it, we encourage you to ask it, because it's going to be, we hope, very interactive. Okay. Chef Alon Shaya was born in Israel, raised in Philadelphia, that's Pennsylvania, not Mississippi, and a proud New Orleanian. Alon has always had a deep love and appreciation for food and the singular way restaurants anchor their communities and the stories of the folks who own and operate those restaurants in those communities. In 2017, he and his wife Emily founded Pomegranate Hospitality, whose restaurants include Saba, New Orleans, Safta's Table, New Orleans, Safta in Denver, Colorado, Miss River and Chandelier Bar at Four Seasons Hotel in New Orleans. Alon is a self-proclaimed troublemaker as a kid. He has matured and has developed into an affable adult. He is now an upstanding and respected member of the New Orleans Society.
Never heard this version of my bio before, but I like it.
Well, you never let us get hold of it either. But I'm going to talk about the troublemaker who, as an adult, this man makes good trouble. Mm-hmm. And that's some right. Of the most impressive, I mean, we know he's been a two-time James Beard Foundation Award winner. He has won so many culinary awards, but the things I want to speak about are the good trouble things. He was named by Southern Living as 50 people who were changing the South, and one of the 50 most influential Jews in America. He is co-founder of the Shaya Barnett Foundation, and this is a foundation he started, and you might want to ask him about, with a high school teacher. And I have to tell you, this book is so strong. You know, some of us read books to read the books and not look at the recipes. The stories in here are brave, and they're bold, and they're insightful, and the story about his high school teacher is worth buying the book for. So their foundation provides culinary education and resources to high school students. And one of the most important things I believe he's done is spearheaded the Rescued Recipes Initiative with the U.S. Holocaust Museum. And they have rescued recipes that come from the World War II experience, trying to keep these recipes alive and teach future generations. They've raised almost $1 million. And so that's the kind of good trouble he's gotten into as an adult. But the name of the book is Shaya, An Odyssey of Food, My Journey Back to Israel. And it's part memoir and part cookbook. And thank you for being with us.
Thank you so much. Thank you, guys. Thank you all for coming, and I'm so happy to be here in Meridian with all of you. I'm going to read just an excerpt from the book here. It's really the first paragraph of the cookbook. I can trace all of my food memories back to one moment. I was in first grade, still the new kid in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, still trying to learn English and forget Hebrew. After school one day, I opened the front door of my house, and I was hit by the scent of roasting eggplants and sweet peppers. I knew immediately what that smell meant. My grandparents were visiting from Israel, and my savta, my grandmother, Matilda, was cooking. For the next month, I would get the feeling of family and closeness that at that point in my life, I didn't otherwise have. So this is, really this one little paragraph here is such a impactful moment in my life, was really kind of the beginning of my love for food and my understanding of what food could mean. As an immigrant child at the age of 4 coming to America and having to learn a new language, having to, understand a different culture, I felt like a fish out of water. And my mother and father, my father moved to America 2 years before that. So I was 2 years old when my father left us in Israel, came to America. And when I was 4, on my 4th birthday, actually, we flew to this country. I was already getting in trouble at that point. I found my way into the airplane galley, and I would load up on all the sodas and stuff them under my airplane seat. And the stewardess had to reprimand me. But by the time I was 5, my mother and father had split up, and my mother, we were super poor, had zero money, and my mother was working 2 jobs. She was selling tickets at a train station, and she was doing accounts receivable for an oil company. And my dad, my mom and dad split up when I was 5 years old, and my mom, took us from our home and moved us into a new home. So here I was 5, 6 years old, zero parental guidance, a lot of time on my hands. And, I began to, I started cooking. Food was kind of like the language that I felt like I could relate to the most. And when my Saba and my Savta, Saba means grandfather and Savta means grandmother in Hebrew, they would come regularly from Israel to be with us and help support my mom. And every time they would come, there would be something good that happened. We would get an air conditioner for our house. My mom got a car, and learned how to drive. We would go have Chinese food out at the local Chinese restaurant. And I just felt like all of a sudden there was this kind of familial support that was so void from my life at that time. And so my Saba and Savta just had this kind of very profound impact on me at this young age, because it gave me a sense of normalcy every time they would come, to feel like, oh, I can talk to them in Hebrew, and I can, be with family again, and not feel like I'm just kind of on my own. And I remember, that smell of peppers and eggplants. It was that moment, I was 7 by that time. And also by the time I was 7, I remember running into my 2nd grade teacher at the grocery store, and I was already buying ingredients to go home and cook dinner by myself. And she saw me in the aisle, and she was like, "What are you doing?" And I'm like, "Oh, I'm getting ready to cook dinner." She's like, "Well, where's your mom?" And I'm like, "Well, she's working." And the next day in school, she stood me up in front of the class and was like, Alon is such an independent boy. Look at him. He's shopping for ingredients and buying, all of these things to cook dinner. And today she would have turned up my family into child services and been like, what the hell are you guys doing? But that was the case, and I was out there on my own, and that smell of peppers and eggplants, it was a dish that I served tonight at the event here on the terrace on the toast. It was that red roasted pepper and eggplant spread called lutnica. It's a Bulgarian spread. And that smell brought me home. It brought me back to a place where I said, oh, everything is going to be okay, at least for a little bit. And I really credit that experience with kind of, for me, understanding at that age what food can do to you and how it can anchor you to something that's more than just a meal, but how it can kind of transport you to a feeling of, it can transport you to a lot of feelings in a lot of places, and it can be both positive and negative, but it also just shows the impact that it can have. And for me, that moment was the moment that I fell in love with cooking and with food, because I really began to understand how it made me feel in a good way. And I began cooking with my Savta for many, many years after that and learning her recipes. And as I got older and began getting into bad trouble, the cooking was the way that I could get a smile from somebody in authority. I wasn't getting any kind of compliments for my math or English or history skills, but when I cooked for people, I would get a smile, and I would get some type of positive feelings from people, and that is what I think drew me to become a chef, and it helped me understand that through cooking and through food that I can impact people in a positive way. And I want to just fast forward now 35 years to this book that I have coming out in the fall, which is really inspired by my work with Rescued Recipes. And Rescued Recipes, for me, it was an initiative that I began with a survivor from the Holocaust. His name is Stephen Fenves. And when he was 13 years old, he was taken from his home in Yugoslavia and sent to Auschwitz death camp. And his mother was killed in a gas chamber just a few days after they arrived. But he and his sister survived. And they survived because they were a very well-to-do family and had a German governess that tutored them as children. And so they learned German at a very young age, and they were then used as translators by the Nazis at the death camp. And so because they were useful, they were able to be kept around. And when the day that Stephen and his sister were taken from their home, their family cook, Marish, went into their apartment and saved their family cookbook at the same time that all of their neighbors were looting their apartment for whatever was left. And after Stephen and his sister Esti survived, Marish returned their family cookbook to them. This was in 1945. In 2019, I came across this family cookbook at the Holocaust Museum in DC. And they told me, hey, look, Stephen is still alive. He works with us as a volunteer. If you'd like, we can put you in touch with him. And so Stephen and I connected, and I said to him, I would love to cook your mother's recipes for you from this cookbook. And they were all in Hungarian. He began to translate them into English. I started cooking for him out of this cookbook. We became friends. And we partnered up with the Holocaust Museum and eventually raised close to $1 million through doing dinners around the country serving his mother's cooking. And it inspired me to say, to write a book about food during World War II, not necessarily specific recipes from the war. You know, people were eating potato peels in holes in the forest in Poland. Like, this isn't food that we would ever want to eat today. But listening to people's stories of survival and creating recipes from those stories in ways that are meaningful to those stories, so that we can get together, cook a meal, share stories of history, and through a meal and through eating, be able to learn and eventually be able to share this information that we've learned. So many, history just continues to repeat itself generation after generation. And so, like, how do we prevent ourselves from getting back to a position of World War II or the Holocaust? And it's really through conversations with our children and conversations with our friends, but conversations in ways that really stick, not just statistics, but through a meal. I think we can all kind of understand. All of you guys are here because you love food. All of you can think back to meals that were very memorable for you, and meals in which you can recount what you learned during that meal. And I feel like today we get so much of our information through these crazy algorithms that show up on our feeds that you're not really learning history from your iPhone. You're learning what your iPhone wants you to, you clicked on a mac and cheese post a while back, and so it's just feeding you mac and cheese. It's not giving you true information that can help you understand what the future can hold, and or what the future could become. And I think through cooking and through food, there's so much power there that we can use that power for good. And that's the way that I've always thought of food, is as this power that I can use for good, not just a meal, but as a superpower. And I hope that this book really creates moments for people where they gather with their friends, with their children, with their church groups, with their social circles, and they share these stories of wisdom that we'll lose the first person narratives, in the next 10 years. And without that, it's like, what have we learned from the past? And a meal is such a great way to kind of inject yourself with that education in a full body experience versus just listening to a lecture or seeing a movie or reading a book. You're chewing, you're listening, you're feeling, you're smelling, you're tasting, and that lasts, that sticks with you. And so that's the goal for the book. It's called Memories of a Good Meal, and it comes out October 6th. It's available for pre-order now, but it's 10 stories of survivors, everything from a Navajo code talker who we met with when he was 106 years old at the Navajo reservation, to a girl who's now 95 years old, but when she was 8 years old, she was given to the people that sold eggs and butter at the market. She was given to that lady who sold eggs and butter by her mother, so she could be raised Catholic instead of Jewish and survive Nazi persecution. And she shared her story of going out and foraging for chanterelle mushrooms and blueberries in the Polish forest. And so all of these stories really kind of bring you into these people's lives through a lens of food and help you learn the lessons that they learned from survival. So
Thank you, Chef.
thank you.
Big hand. And just to remind you, at the conclusion of the program, Chef will be at the table in the back signing this book, Shaya, which is it's the only, we don't have the other book, right?
No, it's not out yet.
So there's an older book, though, right?
This is the only book.
The only book, and
Yep.
but except for the one that's forthcoming.
That's right.
Okay. So now Carol's going to ask the first question, and then we'll open it up to you to ask any questions that you want of Chef Shaya.
Your food blends Israeli traditions with Southern cuisine, and my question is, what connection do you see between these two culinary worlds of Israeli cooking and Southern cooking?
The biggest connection is really just my life, in that that's where I came from and this is where I am. And so I think it is important to, as a chef, I think it's really important to be genuine in your cooking and your storytelling. And I think that food is an extension of storytelling. I think food always tastes better when there's more than just the description of the dish behind it. And so, you know, I kind of tell the story of my life through my cooking. I think that that's the biggest connector of it all. But then I always kind of try to look a little bit deeper and think about, you know, what Southern cooking really is, what Israeli cooking really is, and it's all about combining cultures and cultures that have come together over years and have developed the foods that they are today. Collard greens and jambalaya and fried catfish and fried okra and cornbread, like those aren't foods that were here 200 years ago. They developed over time, and they developed because, you know, the slave trade came to America, and the whole Creole experience of French and African and Spanish and German influence and indigenous people influence began to grow from that melting pot of cultures and backgrounds that all found themselves in the same place. And that's where our food in America comes from. You know, like hamburgers and hot dogs didn't originate in America. You know, they're German influenced. So Israeli cooking is very much the same way, in which, you know, it is a combination of people that have come from Europe and Africa into the land of Israel, and you're now finding yourself in a community where there's Turkish and French and Russian and Polish and Yemenite and Ethiopian and Libyan, like, and you can go on, and all of these people are now living in the same country, and so when that happens, food takes on a life of its own, and it becomes something that really blends those cultures. We need to eat every single day, and people cook the foods that are from their experience. And so to see those recipes, those ingredients begin to intermingle and become the food that we know today is, I think, a really special way to understand what history is all about. The good history, the bad history, the horrible stories of slavery and immigration and forced immigration. You know, it's not a straight arrow of history and recipes. It's very complex, and it's very important to go in and really start to follow those roots back, because once you do that through your cooking, you truly understand where people came from, what they had to endure. And I think it really kind of opens you up to the respect that this food deserves. And so I think that to me is the biggest connector, is like these big melting pots. Whereas, like, you know, places like France or Italy or Germany, they have thousands of years of history of growing that almost singular culture over time, and that food has remained very pure over time, not like in America and Israel where it's combined, and so we don't have recipes that are hundreds of years old. We have recipes that are 50 years old or 30 years old or 100 years old that show us what history has happened.
In your book, you'll have a Hungarian dish with Yemeni bread, or
Right.
Yeah, the table that you set is made up of different countries and different cultures.
Right. Well, that's the Creole. That's the combination of cultures, and I think that, to me, that's a beautiful thing in the sense that people come together from different backgrounds and share meals together and influence each other's eating habits and cooking habits, and they learn from one another about their histories through food and through cooking, and that's something that's driven me as a chef my whole life. Is there's nothing more that I love than to going somewhere that I've never been and meeting someone that I've never met and getting a chance to be in the kitchen with them and helping slice or dice or ask questions and learning about who they are through their food. Like, to me, that's just one of the most beautiful ways to spend an afternoon, and I try to do that as much as I can.
Okay, questions from our friends gathered here? Yeah, I see you.
I've got a mic for you. Let me bring it to you really quick.
Yeah, hang on one second.
What brought you to New Orleans specifically? And then second half of the question, are there chefs there that you particularly enjoy cooking with or eating their food if you're not going to eat your food?
Yes. I rarely eat my own food. I'm always eating other people's food. But what brought me to New Orleans when I was a young boy, I remember watching Paul Prudhomme on PBS making dirty rice and thinking to myself, like, what is this? Where does this world exist? Like, where is this? Like, I never heard an accent like that before. I never saw someone like scraping a pot with a wooden spoon and like getting all the liver up. That, I was like, where does that happen? And so I really fell in love with watching his cooking show at a very young age. And then when I was in high school, my mom brought me to a food festival in Philadelphia called The Book and the Cook. And Emeril Lagasse was there doing a cooking demo. And I was about 16 years old at the time. And I was sitting in the front row, and he made a shrimp beignet and handed it to me from the cooking stage. And I got my first cookbook at that event, and it was Louisiana. It was a Louisiana cookbook called Louisiana Real and Rustic. And I read it on the train ride home. And eventually, when I went to culinary school, I just had in my head that I wanted to get to Louisiana. I wanted to get to New Orleans at some point and learn that kind of food. Because I felt like to me, it felt like really exotic. And so I ended up going to culinary school in New York. I lived in Las Vegas for a couple of years and St. Louis for a couple of years. I was working for a big casino company called Caesars. And when an opportunity came up in New Orleans for me to transfer down there, I just jumped on it. And so I moved down there in 2003. And, never looked back and just really fell in love with it. And where I like to eat in New Orleans, I really love the Vietnamese community and the Vietnamese cooking in New Orleans. I find myself eating that more than anything else. I love a restaurant called Pho Thao Bai. And I also love the cooking of Serene Mbai, who's a Senegal chef who has a restaurant called Dakar. I love eating Nina Compton's cooking. She's a St. Lucian chef who was on Top Chef and creates this beautiful kind of like Creole, Caribbean, New Orleans cooking. I love eating po' boys at Domelisi's, fried oyster po' boys. I love, getting ice cream at gelato at Angelo Bricato's. I love going to Galatoire's and kind of doing it up in the afternoon with crab stuffed fish and shrimp ravago, and so I find myself kind of like being drawn to a lot of like the historical, old school places that really, to me, really fill my heart the most.
Shout out to public broadcasting and Paul Prudhon's show.
That's right.
One of the really early ones.
Yeah.
All right, who's next?
Hi. Hi, y'all.
Hello.
To the little boy that tried to forget Hebrew, what does being immersed in your culture and other people's culture now, what does that mean to him? I think that's my question.
As a young child coming to America, my goal was to assimilate. I didn't want to be different. When you're 5 years old, like the last thing you want to do is like be sharing your bureka and hummus recipe with people that are eating tater tots and sloppy joes. I was embarrassed by those things, and I didn't want to be different. I wanted to be part of everybody else. And so I really, today, I look back at it as one of my biggest regrets of like pushing away my identity for so long. My name, my name's Alon, but my mom says Alon, and most people don't pronounce Alon that way. And so like in kindergarten, I was like, I have to change my name. Like I can't tell people my name is Alon because they're not going to be able to say it. People were calling me Alone, and that made me feel even more lonely. So, there was all of these little things that I specifically tried to bury, push away, hide, forget, so that I can just be like everybody else. And it wasn't really until I was about 35 years old until I began really embracing my roots. I had moved to Italy in my late 20s. I started calling myself Alonzo for a while. I got a Vespa and a man purse, and I was like this Italian guy, and because roasted peppers and goat cheese and olive oil, like all that stuff felt familiar to me, but like being Italian was cool, and being Israeli wasn't. So it took me, well into adulthood to begin to understand that I should respect and really pay attention to who I am. And once I started doing that, my life started to kind of fill in, and I started to feel comfortable being who I am and telling my story and not just kind of coming up with whatever story it was that I felt, was going to fly at the time. And that was a very liberating experience for me. So like today, looking back, I would tell my 5-year-old self, like, embrace your identity, embrace your cultural uniqueness, and that will serve you well in the future. But at the time, I didn't see it that way.
Because I really want to talk to you, but let me share something with you with Steven Spielberg, who said that it wasn't until he did Schindler's List that he became accepting of who he was and proud of it. So in your particular case, a lot of people go through that particular phase. But in my particular case, from the June 1st, 1965 to June 1st, 1966, I was at Columbia University, and I was a dormitory student in graduate school, and there were quite a number of Jewish students there, and so I became addicted to chopped liver.
Oh, nice.
And I was so surprised. I mean, you can't find chopped liver anywhere.
Nope.
So what happened to you guys? I mean, are you ashamed of your chopped liver?
Well, I think it was, there's the saying that goes, "What am I, chopped liver?" I think it's gotten a bad rap because people made it really badly for a very long time. And so I have a really good chopped liver recipe I'd love to share with you.
No, do you have it in the book? Because if you don't have it in the book, I'm not purchasing it.
You got chopped liver in the book?
I don't think I have chopped liver in this book. I don't think I have chopped liver in this book. Because when I wrote this book, I still wasn't comfortable admitting that I liked chopped liver.
Next cookbook, chef.
Yeah, yeah.
Next
Yes.
cookbook.
But that's exactly kind of my point, is that, you can kind of hide behind the uncomfortableness of things, whether it's something as simple as chopped liver being just like notoriously bad, like dry, irony, not good. And like you take something like that and it attaches to who you are. And then you're like, oh, no. Like I'm not, I'm more of a liver pate kind of guy, But then, like, as a chef, I said, well, no, like chopped liver doesn't have to be bad. It can actually be really good if you don't overcook the livers, if you caramelize the onions the right way, if you, whip in the soft boiled eggs into the mixture. If you, like, I like to deglaze it with a little bit of wine, like a marsala or a brandy. And so then it can be something you're proud of. But I feel like everyone has that own little specific journey for themselves of like, when do I stop being ashamed of something and when do I become proud of something? And I think that everybody has to kind of go through that in their life, especially immigrants, especially people that may have come from a culture that's different than the culture that they're surrounded by every day. But I think that's such a beautiful thing, and it's something to be celebrated. And I think that we should cherish that in other people and help to celebrate that in other people versus judging it in other people. And I think for a long time I was really, when you're a young kid, you feel like you're judged by everybody, whether you are or you're not. But it was that feeling that kind of held me back for so long. And it wasn't until I began having my Schindler's List experience where I started to say like, well, this isn't something I should be hiding or ashamed of. This is something that I can celebrate. And it just took me a while to get there. And I think everyone kind of finds that in their own time. But then once you do, it kind of opens you up in the world to so many other opportunities. And so I always urge people that are young that might find themselves being different to celebrate their uniqueness, because it always ends up benefiting them.
Okay, let's thank Alonzo Shaya.
Thank you.
For being here today. Thanks, Chef. We really appreciate it.
Thank you so much, everyone. Thanks for coming.
To learn more and support the Mississippi Arts and Entertainment Experience, go to msarts.org.